Hey everybody, welcome to my live today. I'm really excited to talk about the five domains and some of the other awesome models out there for animal sheltering or that we use in animal sheltering. So really excited to have you guys here. I see some familiar names, but always, like I say, feel free to throw your location in the chat, what you do at your shelter, if you're a volunteer, if you're a manager, if you're a staff member. I always kind of like to see who's here and what's going on. And yeah, anytime if you guys have any questions, you can also throw those into the chat and kind of get to those and answer them as they come up. I love this kind of format because I want to keep people engaged. I hate just talking at computer screens on interactions. So, Durham, North Carolina, nice. What does a shelter behavior person do on their day off? Watch. Yes, that sounds about right. What is a day off, right? I mean, I'm actually right now, it's very interesting because I had the compassion fatigue Marla Andrews on Monday and talking about, how you take a break from animal welfare. And if you're somebody like me, who has definitely slightly I'm finding out in my older years, maybe some neurodivergency, ADHD and whatnot, that I get really passionate about the things I'm interested in. And so it's really, really hard for me to shut my brain off. And for about 10 years, that was roller derby. I could go to roller derby practice and put skates on my feet. And for about 6 hours out of a week, I would be focused on nothing related to dogs. And I'm really having a hard time right now because social media is filled with it. My business is connected to my social media, all that. So I'm actually trying to look into another hobby and I'm thinking it might be rock climbing. So, Marla on Monday really stressed the importance of like things that are not dog related to do to keep yourself sane. So my special interest is dog behavior. I know it's hard and frustrating. Awesome. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and get started here. And you guys came to hear about the five domains, so I don't want to get up talking about myself, but yeah, like really quickly, thank you so much for joining. This episode is something I'm very passionate about because I do think that we have a good understanding of what the like categories of needs the dogs are, but how do we get into that nitty gritty? And so I was hoping to really kind of come up with some examples, and I'd love to hear some ideas that you guys have had at your shelters to meet the needs of the dogs in your care. And so the other thing I want to do is just, if this is your first time being here, welcome. I'm Laurie, and I host these as much as I can every Thursday. This summer's been a little difficult. But, I like to try to host these live sessions so that there's free, accessible information. We can have conversations. People can connect with each other over some of the grievances that we all experience. But most of all, I want to provide education to those that are working day in and out in animal sheltering, obviously with a focus on behavioral welfare. So today we're going to be talking about what are the five domains? Like, how do we do right by the dogs in our care? Obviously, I focus mostly on dogs in a lot of our discussions, but cats, obviously, and even small animals. We can incorporate the five domains into any type of care for animals. And so we're going to walk through that, and then I'm going to give you some examples of how I've helped shelters cater to some of those domains, and also recognizing where deficits may be and what we can do to address them. And now that I'm saying this out loud, I feel like I need some type of a worksheet. So I'm gonna I'm gonna kind of jot that note down because maybe I can circle back at a later time with a cool worksheet. Uh, this is how my brain works. Or five domains. And if anybody has one and you want to just send it to me, I'll credit you for it. But yeah, it might be a cool idea. So basically, the five domains were originally created for farm animals, and they were initially called the five freedoms before we gave them the name of the domains. And it was basically a way for livestock farmers in the UK to decide what is actually providing a good welfare for the livestock. Livestock are different species, they have different nutrition needs, different exercise needs, and though we are growing them for food, it was still very important that while they are with us and while we are caring for them and handling for them, we want to make sure that we're also providing them with a good quality of life to the best of our abilities, even in a captive environment. Like that is the most important thing to recognize is that dogs, despite being domesticated and living with us, they are technically still captive animals because most of them do live with us in our houses. We control their routines. We crate train them in a shelter environment. They're even more restricted on what they would normally be able to do. And therefore, if their needs aren't being met, we have to make sure that we are doing our best to provide for them. And so over the last few years, we've transitioned away from the five freedoms, which was freedom from hunger and thirst and freedom from fear and things such as that, into what are now the domains. So instead of saying what we should be giving them as a freedom, we're getting a little bit clearer about what it is that they actually need. And I think even from now where we are with the five domains, I know one of the animal welfare researchers that I'm friends with, I would say at this point, who's helping me on a series is really looking into like an even deeper idea of what a framework would look like so that we can kind of standardize care. So for those who aren't familiar, I'm just going to kind of go through the five domains as they currently sit. Nutrition being the first one. So we're thinking about the things that dogs in our care need, which is going to be food, what type of proteins they're eating, what type of different things. They have water, of course, is a very important part of nutrition, making sure that all dogs have access to those things. The environment, so we want to make sure that we are providing an adequate environment for the animal. We also want to look at health, so our health of the animal, so that would be veterinary care, maintenance, making sure the animal is getting the exercise that they need to maintain a good exercise and physical health. Behavior interactions, we also want to make sure that we're thinking about what are their interactive social life looks like with other canines, with their human caregivers, with novel people, who they don't necessarily know too well. And then we also want to think about some of their behavioral and social interactions, or behavioral interactions rather, with the environment and the stimuli around them. So we're thinking about what might be some breed specific traits that these dogs need to be fulfilled. So obviously, if we have a dog who is a herding dog, they're going to have different interests and activities than a dog who might be a guardian breed or a terrier who likes to rat and hunt. So all of those things kind of come into the underneath the label of behavioral interactions. It's like kind of how they navigate the world around them, and are we fulfilling that for that identifiable individual? And then finally, we're thinking about their mental state. So, are they cognitively fulfilled? Are we giving them opportunities for problem solving? We know that dogs, while they're scavengers, are also in some cases hunters, and they like to forage, they like to stalk, they like to chase things, right? So those are all part of that cognitive skill set, which is the part of the brain that helps with problem solving and decision making. So, within those five domains, where I see sometimes in sheltering that we can have a little bit of a breakdown is if we look at the broad spectrum, we try to apply that across the board, we sometimes miss some of the individual animal needs within that. So, one of the things so let's start with nutrition. When I'm thinking about nutrition in most shelters, we are looking at feeding everybody a very similar diet. Our food is often provided for us from through donation or from a sponsored company. And unless a dog is on some type of I would say like special diet because they may have food allergies, they're like on a, hypoallergenic diet. A lot of the times we're feeding all of the dogs the same type of food, though we're varying the levels and the amounts of how much they're feeding them. However, when you look at an individual dog, if we have a dog who is like a senior dog who has maybe less energy needs, less exercise needs, and we're feeding them weight-wise the same amount as maybe a really energetic, high intensity, let's just say Australian Shepherd who's like bouncing off the walls, right? The type of food that we're feeding those two dogs is going to interact differently with the way that their body is taking and digesting those nutrients, and then the energy that they're getting from it. So one of the things that I think about too is when we're distributing enrichment and we're using a lot of things that may have sugar in them, like peanut butter, or if we have a lot of stuff with a, fake cheese, if we're using a lot of cheese or even the spray cheese, there's a lot of ingredients in those that sugar, for one, is going to increase energy, right? Even if it's a short burst. So if we're using a ton of it, that nutrition is ending up into the dogs, and then they're sitting in a kennel. And again, if we're feeding a very high protein diet and we have a really highly athletic dog in the shelter, we're kind of feeding that energy need, and they don't have anywhere to then displace those nutrients, and then that can also sometimes be effective. I'm by no means a nutrition expert, and these are things that I have picked up at seminars, webinars, and conferences along the way. But it is something to think about and consider if you have a dog in your care who's maybe having some behavioral challenges and is spinning in the kennel and kind of jumping off the walls, and you're trying to figure out different behavioral interventions. Potentially looking at diet may be somewhere to start and to think about. Another thing that I will see sometimes is when I've walked through shelters and maybe we have a standard bowl size for water, and that standard bowl size gets put in every kennel, and then we have a really small dog who can maybe only drink the first inch or two of the water, but then can't actually get in to finish it. So we're actually not necessarily giving that dog the water that they need. Or a big dog that maybe has to bend all the way down to the floor. So I'm thinking your extra large breeds are not getting or having to do extra work to get down to the water. I think also in play groups, we might put one big bowl. Actually, this is something that drives me bananas, is we put one big water bucket in the middle of the play group, or maybe even two, and then we leave it for the entire day. Just myself, from working in a daycare environment at the earlier part of my career and even living in a multi-dog household, dogs do not like to drink the slobber and saliva of other dogs. They just don't. It's gross. They don't love it. So when I would put a new water bowl down, all of the dogs would come and then they'd all drink, and some would wander over, but the amount of dogs that would wander over, sniff the bowl, and walk away and not drink that water was actually pretty incredible. And so I would pick it up and I would dump it out, replace it, put it back down, and that dog would come back and drink it. So whether or not you think that we're providing water, yeah, maybe out of desperation, they will go ahead and drink it. But realistically, a lot of dogs aren't as gross as we think they are sometimes. And refreshing water is very important. So if you live in a hot climate and you're not refreshing the water throughout the day, that can be really challenging, and can actually be some deprivation there. So the next thing, as far as safety or environmental things that we need to consider for the dogs in our care, is most of our shelters are built in an outdated system. Out when you get out to the west and even down in the south, where there's more space and land at a less expensive cost, although now I think everything's really expensive. You have a little bit more options for expanding your space for your dogs. In the Northeast, we get a little constricted because we're working within a lot of limited space, and real estate is expensive. So if you have a standard kennel that's maybe like an in or out, or maybe you're totally inside, but there's a guillotine door, or maybe you don't have that at all and you only just have a kennel run that's maybe like a 5 by 10 scenario. We want to think about ways that we can give dogs autonomy in that space, because in the real world, when dogs are navigating stress and conflict, they like to hide, they like to move away, they like to climb on top of things. So climbing up high, seeking height, is a way for dogs to increase their distance and feel safer, especially small dogs. So when we have dogs and we have them and we were just putting them in the kennels and they don't have something elevated to get onto or something to hide behind, that can actually be very stressful for them. So when we're thinking about putting our kennel environments together, what I like to do is, after a dog intakes, is recommend checking in on that dog in about 45 minutes to an hour just to drive by and even looking from a distance and seeing where are they in the kennel? What are they doing in that moment? Do they look frightened? Are they jumping on the door? What is it? Are they barking at dogs that walk by? And what can I do to help that dog mitigate the stressors of that environment? So changing the environment may look like adding a coranda bed. It may look like putting a sheet on the front of the kennel. It may be hanging for some kennels do have coverings on them. We may clip a blanket in the kennel for the dog to hide behind in maybe a corner. So this would be for dogs who are maybe a little more timid or fearful. Other alternatives might be to, I actually really like crates a lot because if we're not concerned about dogs jumping out, they can go into the crate or they can climb on top of it, whichever makes them feel a little bit better. And we're thinking about giving them that freedom to move. We also want to put in a couple different types of items, like maybe a stuffed toy, depending on the dogs, stuffed toy, a chew toy, like a nylabone of some sort. And we want to give them a little bit of variety so they can find something that they can have. And for those big mouth bull breed dogs, I love the silicone donuts, I think they're called. I forgot the name of the brand. Or Go Nut is another brand. They make like a hard rubber ball, and the amount of dogs that will just kind of, when they're stressed, pick them up and hold them in their mouth is really awesome. When I see animals utilizing things in the kennel environment, it tells me behaviorally that they have other coping mechanisms than barking. And if we deprive them of those coping mechanisms, what we are going to get then is a dog who is barking or is lunging, or maybe starts resource guarding some of the small things in the kennel. Whereas a dog who may have access to alternative things to do may choose to do those instead. So giving the dog in the environment that they are enclosed in something to do. So you'll see this a lot in zoos. And I remember one of my favorite zoos that I've been to is the Columbus Zoo. Because when we went there, I went on a special morning tour because behavior nerd. And so we went and watched the lions in the morning, waking up and getting fed. And then what they did is they took the zebra droppings and put it in straw and put it in the lion enclosure so they could like roll around in the zebra poop, which was super fun. And then we went and made some enrichment for the monkeys. And then the staff went in there and kind of distributed out the monkey enclosure. So they had like obviously in their enclosure they had trees and they had things hanging so the dogs could get to them. And I do think one of the things that we don't do enough in shelters is hang things from the top of the kennel if we're able to. You can use chains to do it. You can use cables. You can use things that dogs won't destroy or hurt themselves on, and putting their food there and so they can jump up and punch it out or just move it around. I think there's a lot of ways that we can improve our standard kennels. And one of the things and initiatives I would love to do in the future is help shelters design kennels that are built in with some of these structures so that we don't have to kind of, I don't know. It's nice to be able to fit things in the way for the dogs based on their uniqueness, but it would be really good if we at least had places for dogs to elevate in all of our shelters or to get underneath something. So maybe in the future I can run a trial. I'm hoping to go back for my master's degree at some point, and that might be something that I look into for shelters. So yeah, if anybody's interested in me running a study there, I'll go back to school. That'll be like maybe my contingency. Yeah, so then when we're thinking about our behavioral interactions, I think that there's sometimes ways that we miss or don't cater to the needs of the individual animal. And I cross your fingers because I just applied to speak at Animal Care Expo for 2026. I know it's a tough one to get into as a speaker, but I really want to focus and help shelters do more individualized dog introductions within a framework of how they are responding behaviorally to the environment and the other dog that we're using as an assessor, because each individual dog is going to respond to the environment in a way that is going to be different from another dog. So we're thinking about, all of our this dog's learned experiences, potential trauma that this dog has gone through, the novelty of the space that the dog is in, just of the environment of the shelter. And then we're also thinking about who this dog is, uh, potential breed traits or tendencies. Just because a dog is a certain breed doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have those behavior traits. However, sometimes we can kind of think about those as we're walking into a dog-to-dog evaluation. So instead of just this on leash, like let's just walk past each other or let's just do an on leash greeting and walk away. I want to spend more time getting to know like how this dog is going to navigate that interaction, not necessarily just are they going to be aggressive or not. I think we do a lot of labeling dogs, and I know this because many shelters I've been to where dogs have been labeled like solo only dogs or dog selective dogs due to just on-leash reactivity or what can look like aggression. And when I get them met up with the right helper dog and I help introduce them in a way that's less stressful than some of these other typical approaches, I find that the dog actually can play and have a great time socializing with friends. And so there's been many dogs in my career that I've been able to kind of pull off of that selective list, which is super nice. Maybe they don't love all dogs, but they might be indifferent to them. And maybe the first interaction they had was just too forced. When we're looking at also our playgroup interactions, many of the shelters that I go to maybe bring dogs out for playgroup, but they lack the intention behind it, which is what my course, my mentorship course, which I will be releasing next week, I think, is going to be at the end of August. And it's talking about how we can use playgroups not only to set the dogs up for the best welfare experience they can, meeting those exercise needs, the cognitive needs, but I also think, being able to utilize the data that we're gathering from their social interactions can be really helpful for that matchmaking piece. So when we're thinking about in-shelter behavior interactions and knowing that safety is a top priority for all animals, including humans, if you feel like you're not safe in an environment, you are more likely to display stressed or avoidant behavior or confrontational behavior. So when we have dogs who are in our care, those interactions that they're having with the world around them, every interaction that we are having should be with a consideration of how can I make this less stressful for the animal. If we are here for the animals, that should be our goal at all times. So when I'm approaching the kennel front and when I'm training new volunteers and I am training new staff members, we are very intentional about saying don't ever approach a kennel directly from the front, don't peer over the kennel, don't throw things into the kennel unless the dog sees where you're trying to throw a treat or something. Like have them acknowledge that you are there first. There's very little things in the shelter that I see can go kind of sideways. Another one is broom or the squeegee reactivity. So we have dogs who maybe are reactive to those cleaning tools. And when for what you can do, which is a very relatively simple task, is stationing that dog somewhere else during a cleaning time or having a volunteer take that dog for a walk during cleaning time, or maybe there's an outside kennel they can go to. Really thinking about looking into the way that individual animals react to those and acknowledging that maybe because an animal's not reacting to something like that in the kennel, that doesn't mean that they're not having a really stressful experience. So for some dogs, it could even just be putting a visual barrier up during morning cleaning and then removing it. Another thing I think is, for as far as behavior interactions, we have to consider the fact that dogs need relationships in their lives. And yes, we can try our best to get them playing with each other in play groups. Maybe we are doing buddy walks. I love buddy walks. It's so great to have those programs in place. Maybe we co-house responsibly, which is even better. I think co-housing is one thing that we should do a lot more of in our shelter systems. And I know all the drawbacks, trust me, but that kind of goes along with my kennel design project I want to do in the future. But the one thing that I think we forget to consider is broken relationships. So the longer a dog is in our care, and we may have volunteers that come and go, or staff members that start and leave. Even in the daycare I worked in, and this is where I learned a lot about the emotional bonding capacity of dogs, especially in stressful settings, because we all know dog daycare is stressful for a lot of dogs. Is that obviously there's a lot of dogs as they go through adolescence and hit maturity and either getting kicked out of daycare, or people just don't find the need to bring their dog as frequently because it was usually meant as a way to exercise the dog and keep them out of trouble, that type of a thing, at least in their house. They might get into trouble at the daycare. But the dogs who continued to come after some of their friends started leaving began having harder times building new relationships. So when they came in as puppies and they met their other friends and they decided who they like to play with, you could see how happy they were to come into daycare and interact with those friends and see you and look for the staff members they love the most. But as staff members would leave, and because I was there for about 5 years, and then when their friends started one at a time, kind of not coming as frequently or kind of dropping off, and we would have new dogs come in, you could see their tolerance level get lower and lower, and they're less interest in meeting and hanging out with newer staff members. And of course, there's dogs who are overly social and love everybody, but it was very interesting to watch that they just didn't enjoy coming anymore, right? Because they lost the things that were important to them in that environment. It wasn't the going to the daycare that was fun for them. It was going to the daycare and seeing their friends and their favorite staff members. So when I think about that in a sheltered environment, we know most of these dogs have already lost the people or family they're most attached to. And then as we cycle them through play groups and we cycle them through volunteers and staff members, every time they lose those relationships, they stop trying as hard to form new ones because, as we all know, loss is really hard. And of course, this is very anecdotal to my own experience, but I think it tracks. And I saw it with my dog Boo too, in the past when she was in one area of the shelter for a very long time with some neighbor dogs, and her direct neighbor was moved out of that location for behavioral reasons. She was actually sensitizing. They were in a quiet area of the shelter, and she was sensitizing, meaning like every time somebody came into the room to clean them, she was like shaking. And this is after about 6 or 7 months. So we wanted to move her back out to the general population in a quiet area there so that she'd get more used to people again, really re-desensitize her because she was actually struggling quite a bit. But what that meant is that dog, that my dog, who ended up being my dog, she wasn't at the time, was living next to for all that time, is suddenly gone. And about 2 weeks later, I rotated in, and I had what ended up being my dog in the play group, and she was a very like depressed, socially awkward dog, and I hadn't thought she wouldn't let anybody touch her. She really hadn't bonded with anybody. Like she very much kept to herself. And I remember calling or sending one of my assistants to go grab her neighbor, Cassie, from the GP. And as Cassie was approaching the play group, Cassie was the neighbor dog, Boo saw her and just started jumping in circles. And I had never seen this dog in the like year. Well, at that point, it was about 8 months that they had been there. I had never seen her show any sort of excitement towards another living being because it was so suppressed. And I realized in that moment that she had a strong bond, and we need to be really careful with that in the shelter because we basically took, even though it was the best thing for Cassie to move, maybe we should have considered the dog next to her as well, especially because they had been living together for so long. This was a cruelty case, so right, length of time. And in our shelters, not only do we not usually have dogs for that long period of time, but we're constantly cycling. And the ones that are staying for longer periods of time are like, yeah, cool, play group, I'm meeting new friends, I'm going on buddy walks, this is really cool. But the longer and longer they're there, those social relationships that they lose can be very impactful for them. So, yeah, sorry to spend so long on that topic, but I do feel like it is one of the most important ones because emotionally, which if you guys want to join me on not this Monday, but the following with Tom Candy. He's going to be talking about emotions in shelter dogs and how that impacts stress and care. But I think we don't often spend too much time thinking about those loss of relationships and how that can contribute to trauma and also the welfare. So yeah, so that's all I kind of want to think about. So how can we really fix that? I think for those are things we just need to keep in mind that if we have dogs with longer lengths of stay, when we're running those play groups for them, maybe we don't want to throw as many dogs at them, new dogs all the time, and make sure we're doing what I like to call enrichment playgroups. So these are in playgroups that don't have brand new dogs or young adolescent pushy dogs or difficult dogs that dog has to now navigate. It once we hit like 30 or sorry, 90 days in the shelter for a dog, I am going to use that dog less and less in playgroups that are for testing and assessing and things like that, and making sure that I'm pairing that dog with friends that they will really like and enjoy so that they can maintain those social bonds rather than like chucking new dogs at them all the time. So these are some of those like little considerations. If we have a volunteer who comes in regularly to walk Fido on Thursdays and then they're taking a sabbatical for 2 months, we shouldn't be thinking just, oh, we're losing that volunteer for 2 months, that we're down a person to walk dogs. We want to consider those dogs that she has that relationship with and think, how is it going to affect the dogs not having that person here for the next 2 months? Because it does really have an impact on the dogs, even though we can't always see it on the surface level. Okay, so I'll move on from that. But again, I think that the reaction to the environment for people, social interactions, we have to think about the stimuli, what's going on as far as noise, smells is another one we need to think about. If I think shelters should do a lot more of bringing outside in. So in the fall, truck in leaves from outside. In the summertime, there's flowers, make sure they're safe, those types of things because in a shelter, most of what they can smell is each other and chemicals from cleaning, and laundry and things like that. So we're really thinking about those shelter interactions these guys are having on an individual day and thinking about what can I do to make it less stressful for the animal. And then finally, we're looking at the mental state. So when we're thinking about mental state, we're thinking about cognitive stuff. So if dogs are in the kennels, so let's say 22 hours out of a day, and we're not routinely providing them with some type of novelty or engagement experience, that is going to wear down those cognitive skills that they've developed. They may lose some of those problem solving skills. They may also, again, if we're not providing accurate things or the most beneficial things that we can in the kennel structure itself by providing levels and areas to rest on and different types of toys, maybe varying surface types. If we're not providing some of those things in the shelter and we just got concrete and maybe a bed and a water bowl, they can kind of start turning off their brain, and that's where we start seeing a lot of pacing, like the stereotypic pacing at the front of the kennel with the head tipping, or maybe we see a lot of jumping and slamming on the door, or maybe ping-ponging off the walls. I remember specifically one of the first shelters I used to volunteer at, in Connecticut was a municipal animal control facility, and they did not allow the dogs out of their kennels during the week, and Saturdays was the only time we could walk them. And they also did not allow the dogs to have toys in their kennel. And so these dogs were pretty deprived on a regular basis. So when we would come in on Saturdays, they would be ecstatic. And we had this one dog who had been there for, I think, 8 months at that time. Her name was Harlow. Like probably like a female 3 to 5 year old pit bull. And what she would do is she would pick up her shit or her poop and put it everywhere, like all over the walls every single day. And then the ACO officers would get upset with her. And I don't think they were mean people. They loved the dogs. There was a huge lack of understanding what the dogs really needed. And so they would spray her with the hose in the kennel. And it was really hard to see that because it was really the fact that she had nothing else to do and she was a highly intelligent dog. And it took her a long time to get adopted because she developed some really bad habits. The spinning, she would be jumping off the walls, she would be throwing the poop everywhere. And yeah, so if we're thinking about keeping dogs, especially now with how many dogs we are having with behavioral challenges that are coming into our shelter, as a community, I think we want to have a lower euthanasia rates. We want to have a higher live release rate. Like, who doesn't? But I think a lot of shelters now have even more pressure to do that, both from the public and for obtaining, resources and grants and things like that. We need to think more about if we're going to be captively holding animals in a space that is really not ideal for them. All of these little nuances for each individual dog do really, really matter. So, as we're thinking about all of these different things, we want to really embrace this idea that every interaction matters, even from the moment of intake. When the dog comes into the intake room, can we give them a Kong? Can we give them something to do while we're talking with the owner and getting the dog transferred over to us? If we have a dog who comes in as a stray overnight into an intake area, can we have calming music playing, or can we have, well, maybe not overnight, but maybe we can have something that the ACO officer can give to the animal. Maybe whether it's like a ripped up paper bag with some peanut butter or something, just having a little freezer in that space. If I walk into one more shelter that doesn't have a deep freezer, my gosh, guys, get deep freezers because that way you can really embrace having your volunteers help prep enrichment pretty far out. And that way your staff always has stuff to grab for dogs, well, we should have like a structured kind of enrichment schedule and routine, but if we have an animal who's really having a hard time, they can jump into that enrichment box and grab something for a particular animal. So right at that point of intake, we're identifying, hey, this is a stressful thing. Let's think about let's think about how we can make this feel better in any way. And then as we transfer them into the shelter and we start to do our behavior evaluations, as we want to do dog-to-dog introductions, as they go through their medical intake exam, we want to be trying to use those fear-free principles. We're collecting the data of what that interaction looked like. We don't have to do handling and touching assessments if one of the first things they are doing is going into a medical, physical exam at the time of intake or maybe within 24 hours. We're collecting that data already. So re-stressing them to collect that data again doesn't necessarily make sense. So, thinking about the ways that our current operations are running and how we can decrease that by looking at these 5 domains and saying, hey, what's missing from this part? Or are we meeting these? I think one of the things I always loved and do love about coming from a management perspective is saying like, hey, everything's running smoothly right now. That's awesome. Um, cool. What can we make better? Never settling that it's good enough and always striving to do something more. Because the reality is, yes, we're trying to move the animals through our system and out the door, but we also, especially with the longer lengths of stay that we're seeing in dogs, need to really think about every single interaction in the shelter matters to getting that animal out the door. And that in general is kind of what the pathways and identifying these earlier on are really helpful for. I'm really excited because the 5 domains, nutrition, environment, health, behavior interactions, and the like cognitive mental state, these are really the big categories, but within each of them, it's really identifying for individual dogs what it means for them. And I'm pretty excited because some of you have maybe seen some of the work I've been doing with Dr. Karen Griffin. We're going to actually be releasing a series, I think in September, but maybe one or two teaser videos sooner than that. She has been researching and working on a framework of dog needs, which takes into account a lot of different things. It's actually very similar to the domains, but it puts it kind of in a pyramid of importance and like a framework of where you can start and head up. So it kind of takes instead of um, what was I going to say? Like biological needs, and nutrition. We're thinking about like physiological needs, which actually incorporates all of that. Safety needs, which is actually the largest category that we should be looking at, is how do we make this animal feel safer? That incorporates a lot of the environmental stuff I was talking about. Social needs is definitely right there as well. And then we're looking at exercise, movement, and cognitive. So her research in this area, I think, is going to be really impactful once it's finalized and completed, but we're going to be introducing some of that stuff soon. And it's not that the five domains aren't actually hitting all those categories. It just doesn't go in depth enough. And we want to have something to think about. What are all these little nuances that we can be considering? So I have about 5 more minutes. If anybody has any questions or has any examples of ways that you have use those domains to set your shelter or your animal care in a direction, or things that you look for, please go ahead and drop them in the comments. So I'll hang out for a second, and I'll start, I guess, talking about what's next. Okay. All right. So I'll keep my eye on the chat box. So next Thursday, I'm gonna have a special guest on this of John Peevler of sorry, I'm saying a lot. It's because my brain gets tired when I get excited and I talk about something. That's the ADHD part. I'm learning all of these things about myself over the last few years, and it's pretty fun, but I also am realizing my deficits in addition to getting older. Like my memory and my speech patterns. So John's going to be on next Thursday, and he is going to be showcasing a wide variety of low stress animal handling gear. He has a ton of experience, information. He has rescued dogs from all over the world. He just did a conference in like South Korea or something like that on teaching police officers all over the world on how to handle animals more humanely. And he has a lot of products for that. So he's going to be on here showing us a bunch of different things. So that's going to be really fun. And then Tom Candy and I are going to be doing emotions, a webinar on Monday the 28th. It's going to be emotions in dogs in the shelter and stress. And then finally, what we're gonna want to let's see. So yeah, emotion stress. Oh, I wanted to mention that that's going to be at 4 p.m. on Monday, instead of the normal time of 6 p.m. because he lives across the pond. And then as we get into August, and probably within the next week or two, I'm going to be dropping information about the playgroup mentorship that I will be teaching. So all of the details will be coming out relatively soon about that. I'm just trying to finalize a few things before I make the purchasing link go live. So I'm really excited. I'm limiting it to about 8 people because I want to make sure the format is good and we have time to talk and go through case studies, and you can bring your playgroup stuff to me and we can go through things, and really looking forward to it. So I think that's it, and I don't see anybody with questions. So I think I'm going to log off, but thank you all for attending today. I hope this was helpful just to kind of get your brains thinking about expanding beyond just the concepts of the five freedoms and really going into the domains themselves. And then finally, I think when Karen drops and releases the framework, that's going to be something to dive even further into to make sure we're maximizing our care for our animals. So yeah, thanks so much for joining, and I hope to see you in some of the upcoming stuff. And yeah, I'll be around if you guys want to email me or shoot me a message. That's always cool too. I'll talk to you later. Bye. Bye, Dee. Bye, Rob. Thanks for joining. Thank you, everybody.